Today, I'm going to take you through my whole retouching process, step by step, to take an image that looks like this, straight out of camera, to a final retouched image that looks like this. Now, my main goal with retouching is not to change my subject too much. We've all seen bad retouching where people have very plasticky or waxy looking skin. We want to avoid that. We're just getting rid of some of the small distractions, so all the focus is on our subject. One of the general rules that I follow when I'm retouching is that if something is permanent, I typically leave that. Things like freckles or scars or moles, I might tone them down a little bit so they're not distracting, but I typically don't eliminate those altogether. But then things like stray hairs or acne or things that come and go, we can retouch those and get rid of them because they're not a permanent part of our subject's face. So one of the main tools I use for retouching is this small Wacom tablet. I highly recommend these if you're gonna do any serious skin retouching. The space on here matches up to your computer screen, and the pen actually has pressure sensitivity. So when you're using brushes to dodge and burn, you can press light or press harder to change the opacity of that brush. So this comes in super handy and it really speeds up the whole process. Sometimes if I forget this tablet, I have to retouch with the trackpad or with my mouse. You don't get the pressure sensitivity and it's just much clunkier and slower. This thing's a lot faster. So I handle all my raw photos in Capture One, but you could also use Lightroom. And what we're doing in Capture One is very, very simple. You can do the same thing in Lightroom, and then we're doing most of the retouching and color correction work in Photoshop. I just find that in Photoshop, it's a lot easier to work with multiple layers, which is something that I do. And a lot of the healing, skin retouching, dodging and burning is a lot faster and easier in Photoshop with the tablet than trying to work with layers in Capture One or in Lightroom. They're a little clunky still. So let's get started. Today we're working on an image of my friend Rachel. We did this shoot a couple of weeks ago and I have a video about how I lit and shot these photos if you want to see that. Check it out, it'll be in one of these corners. But like I said, we're starting in Capture One. One of the things I want to bring up first is this top left tab. I'm not sure what this is called in Lightroom, but this base characteristics tab is basically just the profile of the camera you're shooting on. And it automatically selects the Sony a7 IV, what I used for this shoot. But I think the original curve is this auto curve. And this kind of looks like what I'm seeing in my camera when I'm shooting, but it's a little too contrasty. So I've changed it to this linear response. And then I went in here and I saved this as the default for my Sony. So all of my images are imported with this linear response, and it's just a very flat tone curve, which gives me all the control when I want to start editing my image. I don't want some unknown curve applied to this image that I then have to compensate for. So this is what things look straight out of the camera with that flat curve. And you can see I haven't done anything to the image yet. Like I said, if we're retouching in Photoshop, everything that we're doing in Capture One is very, very simple. I'm basically just messing with exposure, shadows and highlights, make sure that I have as much detail as possible in that image. And then I'll change white balance and stuff if it needs it. But for this image, we're just gonna bring this exposure up a bit, keeping an eye on our histogram up here. We wanna bring the highlights down to keep detail in those clouds. Maybe the whites of her dress too, just a little bit. Something like that. We'll bring up these shadows. So like I said, very flat image, plenty of room here on the sides of the histogram. Nothing's clipping. And this is pretty much it. I like the white balance in this frame, so we probably won't even change that. And this is ready for Photoshop. One of the other tools that I like in Capture One, I'm not gonna get too deep into it here, but you can add a new layer with this people mask, and it will automatically create a mask that's just skin. And then if you go to look at it, you can see that it highlights all the skin, but not the eyes or the lips. And then this skin tone tool is nice for evening out skin tones if someone has sort of splotchy skin or if there's some redness, but we don't really need that with this image, so we're not even gonna use this. Delete that mask. Like I said, ready for Photoshop. So we will export this. I typically do Photoshop documents, PSD files. You could also use TIFF files. Export that. All right, now we have this image opened up in Photoshop. There are a couple keyboard commands you should try to remember. The number keys will change your opacity up here of your brush. Those come in handy. And then some of the keyboard commands for these tools will come in handy. B for your brush, J to change over to your healing tool, S for the clone stamp tool. And then if you hold the space bar, you'll pull up the hand. And when you're zoomed in, you can hold space and use your little tablet to pull yourself around the image. Now, I have an action built out that has all of my retouch layers, and I will put this action down in the description so you can download it and bring it into Photoshop, and it'll just build out all these layers for you on top of an image. So you just have your base background image that you've opened up, the TIFF or PSD file that you exported from Lightroom or Capture One. And then you just do this full retouch, hit play. And one thing that I've been running into lately, Photoshop didn't used to do this, but all of these layers should be black and the action should be filling them in with black, but I don't know if it's a Photoshop bug or something. But you basically just come in here and based on how these are set up, you can either hit Option Delete or Command Delete and it will fill these in with black. So you want to just fill these. So once you've added these layers, you make sure all of your layer masks are black. We can get to work retouching. For now, I'll just turn all these off. They're not doing anything. And this top retouch layer is where we're gonna do all of the healing work to touch up skin, get rid of any small blemishes, fix any hair. So I'll just zoom in nice and close. I'll get my healing brush tool over here, or hit J. And I like to, if you click in here, I typically like using the spot healing brush or the patch tool. And I'll just get rid of some of these little blemishes. Rachel has pretty good skin, so there's not much to work on here. But maybe just like some of these little distractions. And then up here, I just want to get some of these little flyaway hairs. Now up here, where we have some of these flyaway hairs, we don't want to get rid of everything because then your head just kind of ends up looking too flat and smooth. And people do have flyaway hairs, so we're not getting rid of that stuff completely. I will touch up in here, get rid of some of these little distracting crosshairs. Something like that. And this one's kind of bright and distracting, so we'll brush that out of there. You can tell this looks a little funky now. Get rid of this. And then these, I'll typically just kind of get rid of some of the ends, something like that. So they're not so long and distracting. Sometimes the brush doesn't do exactly what you want it to do. You just kind of give it a couple brushes. So I still don't like how much hair there is here. So we're going to hit Command J, make a new layer, and we'll just call this hair fix. And then we will add a layer mask. It's gonna stay white for now. And we're gonna be very aggressive about getting rid of this hair, but then we're gonna use the layer mask to kind of reduce the impact of what we're doing here. So we can come in here and really just start bringing some of this hair back. And it's okay if it looks messy right now. I will show you the fix. So something like that. Obviously looks pretty bad. We will fill this with black. So anything that's black in a layer mask is going to hide that layer. And then we're just gonna brush in with a low opacity white brush to reveal this layer on top of the layers underneath. So switch to our brush. We'll do, about 20%. And we're just gonna use white to paint on this mask. And we're just gonna brush some of this away. Something like that. So that those hairs aren't so distracting. They're a little faded, but they're not gone. That might be a little too much. So we'll bring the whole opacity of this layer down a little bit. Maybe somewhere like that. So it still looks pretty natural. This is what her hair is doing, but it's not bright and distracting. So as we move into these next layers, this dodge and burn, these layers are curves layers. The dodge layer is just bringing the exposure up. And you can see if I fill this mask with white, this is what this curve is doing. Just making everything bright. I'm gonna hide that again. And this one's just doing the opposite, bringing the exposure down. So this curves layer is just pulling all those tones down. And now what we're gonna do here, I'm actually going to add a curves layer on top of everything. And right now this is just for reference, so we can kind of see the work we're doing. But in these dodge and burn layers, we're gonna use a very light brush, like 10% opacity, white brush, set up to be very soft, zero hardness, and we will use this to just kind of even out any sort of skin inconsistencies. You can see I have this luminance layer. Sometimes it's easier to see this stuff in black and white, but see how we have a little darker here and then a little lighter and some patchiness. We're just gonna use dodge and burn to kind of smooth that sort of stuff out. So we can go to dodge, and just very lightly on the tablet, we're gonna brush in a little bit. Burn some of these brighter spots. Dodge this little darker spot. And I'm just gonna work through a quick pass of this image. If I was doing this for a client or for my own portfolio, I might be a little more detailed, but for this video, we're just gonna kind of work through some of this real quick. And this is still in real time, but I'm gonna soon jump into a time lapse of all of this. And I will just kind of work through the image little by little. Remember, I can hold the space bar to bring up the hand and pull myself around the image as I work. Normally lighten up under here a little bit. A little under the eyes. And then I can use the bracket keys to change the size of my brush, depending on the area I'm working on. All right, like I said, we're not gonna get super detailed, but you can see the before and after in this image, especially kind of up here, just a little bit. And you can tell it's a little bit overboard. We're going to, let's turn this back off. So now you can kind of see the changes. One of the general things I do when retouching, it's easy to see those changes if you go a little overboard, and then you can bring the opacity back to get it to a point that you like. I have these two dodge and burn layers in a folder. We're just gonna change this whole folder opacity. This is 0, this is 100. I'm gonna find somewhere that we like, probably somewhere in the middle. I think something like that, 47. Kind of evens out those tones, but it doesn't look unnatural. For now, we'll skip this dodge and burn large. That's for like face shaping sort of stuff. We'll get into that later on. Next, let's go to this eye folder. Turn that on. So eye whites, this is really just for the white part of the eyes. As we brush in here with 100% opacity brush, just helps whiten up these eyes. And again, you can be a little aggressive with it now, and we're gonna tone back the opacity later. So this is just a hue saturation layer, and you can tell we're bringing down the saturation and bringing up the lightness. And then a layer mask with black to hide it, and we just paint on the white to bring it into play. Next, this eye contrast layer. Right now it doesn't have anything, but this is basically just a curves layer for the eyes. All right, we'll bring it way up just so we can see what we're doing. Brush in our white and just get this part of the eye, the iris. And then we can bring these darks down and just do a little S curve in the eyes. Something like that. And again, overkill, but we'll bring the opacity down. And then for these iris layers, these are just to add a little bit of texture into the iris. So you have to move down to one of these layers that actually have an image in it. If you hold Alt, you can use the color picker and just pick some of the brighter parts of the eye. And I'll typically move this up and to the right a little bit, get a little more color and a little brighter. And then make sure you're back on one of these iris layers. And just with a very tiny brush, you're gonna do these little strokes radiating out. Same over here. And then when you bring this way down, maybe something like 10, 12%, 10%. Just adds a little bit of texture in the eye. And we're also gonna bring down this white to something that looks a little more natural. Maybe in there, contrast, something like that. So just a little bit of work on the eyes to brighten them up. We can actually even bring this whole folder down just a touch. I like it around there at 70. Cool. Teeth layer, not a factor here. I'm actually gonna bring you over to another image where we do have someone with a full smile, and I'll show you what this tooth layer does. All right, so here's an image of my friend Kelly, and I'm just gonna bring you in to show specifically what this teeth layer is doing. So this is another hue saturation layer. And you're just bringing down the saturation and bringing up the lightness. It just helps whiten teeth a little bit. Kelly already has good teeth, so it's not doing a whole lot here. Once you have it brushed in, so it's just affecting the teeth, you can change these lightness layers. But again, you just want it to look pretty natural. And you can also change the opacity here. but that's what that layer is doing. So back to Rachel's, we obviously don't need that. We can just delete it. This reduce redness layer used to be part of my workflow. It's still in the action, but if you do that skin tone trick in Capture One, you're never really gonna need to use this. I think Capture One does a better job of it, and I think it's better to do that early on in the workflow. So we're just gonna get rid of that layer too. These solarize and luminance ones are just those helper layers. This one helps you see that contrast a little more when you're doing dodging and burning. And then this solarize really just shows small things in the skin. If you need to dodge and burn them or heal them out, you can see them easier with this layer, but I don't use that one all that much. And once we're done with retouching and dodging and burning, you don't need these layers, so we'll get rid of those. And then our initial kind of curves layer just to help see things, don't need that either. We're gonna do color corrections from scratch now. We can close some of these. So like I said, I like to work with multiple layers in Photoshop. I just find it easier to do small multiple curves adjustments than one big curve adjustment. So I have created a keyboard command in Photoshop. Command M will make a new curves layer for me, and then Command B will make a new channel mixer layer, which is how I control saturation after adding a bunch of curves and contrast. So I'll typically go through here and just start with these small base curves adjustments. Kind of see where I want to take the image. I think overall we kind of want to bring it down a bit. Maybe a little more punch into the midtones, a little more dark on the sides, something like that. And you can tell as I'm adding contrast with these curves, it's also bringing out a lot of saturation, which I don't want. So we'll do this channel mixer layer. And this is my favorite way to get rid of saturation. You're gonna use these presets, the black and white with either a blue filter, green, orange. They all kind of change the look of the image. And I typically do green or blue, and then I'll bring that opacity down to like somewhere around 20. I really like how that looks. Maybe we want to do a little more curves. I'm liking that. And now that we have some contrast in this image, if I want to, I can come back to these large dodge and burn layers, and I'll use these layers with a low opacity brush just to add a little bit of shape to the face. So we'll kind of darken these cheekbones a bit, under here a bit, maybe along the nose, and then we'll dodge where the light is hitting the eyes and the cheeks. Ridge of the nose, the lips a little. So you can see that difference there. Again, it's a little too strong. So we'll bring this down. We just want like a touch of it, so we'll do like 20. And then once I consider an image pretty much done, we're just gonna do a little bit of sharpening and add a little bit of grain. So Shift Option Command E, we'll do a new layer that combines all the layers under it. We'll go here to Filter, Camera Raw, and we're just gonna sharpen the image, bring in some masking, and if we hold Alt or Option, we can see where the sharpening is being applied. So we really just want it on the edges, something like that. Maybe we don't even need that much. And then we're going to do Effects, bring in some grain, something like maybe 30. I like that. So I think that's about it. I'll normally collapse all these into a folder and just name that color correction. And we can kind of see how far we came. This is the image out of camera, and this is the final retouched image. I think it looks pretty good. So that's about it for my whole retouching process. I'll save this image with all the layers as a PSD or a TIFF, and archive all those. So if I need to go back and make some changes, I can, and then I'll export a JPEG, and that's what I use for sharing. But not every image needs this level of retouching. This is kind of my top tier retouching for high-end client work or the stuff that's gonna go in my portfolio. But I'd say you can get 90% there just in Capture One using those curves, and then maybe just doing some basic blemish retouching in Photoshop. So you don't always need to retouch every image like this. This really is reserved for just my favorite images. All right guys, that was a tough one. It's tough to think about how I'm gonna put this video together. I'm screen recording and talking to a camera and trying to talk through everything I'm doing on screen. So hopefully it wasn't confusing and you can use some of this in your workflow. If you found anything helpful, please let me know in the comments, or if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.